Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Network Segmentation and Microsegmentation, Keys to the Next Generation of Enterprise Defense, sponsored by Optiv and broadcast by Informa. I'm Becky Bracken with Dark Reading. I'll be your moderator for today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn more about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we'll ask you to provide feedback via the survey widget, which is found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information that we can use to improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or you can type your issue into the Q&A area and we can offer one-on-one assistance. With that, let's get on to our presentation, Network Segmentation and Microsegmentation, Keys to the Next Generation of Enterprise Defense. Discussing today's topic is Jonathan Kerr, who's an independent cybersecurity expert, Doug Schiel, Practice Manager for Cyber Defense and Applied Security at Optiv, and Dennis Payton, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Private Cloud at Palo Alto Networks. If you want to learn more about our speakers, you can find their bio in the speaker's bio widget on your screen. And again, if you want to ask any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A area that's also on the right side of the screen. So with that, I will hand things over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Becky, and hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. So today I'm going to talk a little bit with my friends from Optiv about network segmentation and indeed microsegmentation, and why we see these as the keys to the next generation of enterprise defense. So I think we all understand network segmentation pretty well. It's been around now for decades. It's partitioning a network using routers, using a filtering switch or some other mechanism to ensure that we have a partitioned network and we are controlling the flow of data between different trust zones. But microsegmentation takes that to the next level and gives a little bit more depth and control. So let's take a look at what that means. It's become an emerging best practice. It's become something that we see on many levels. It improves upon network segmentation and actually allows us to reach up to the application layer as well. As security practitioners, we get this ability to create separate security segments right down to the individual workload level, which is tremendously powerful. More than that, there's a certain amount of independence on the underlying infrastructure. So it's applicable in the cloud and in our existing data centers. And of course, the other thing, of course, it's applicable across different clouds. So we have the opportunity to be hybrid and be multi-cloud. Network virtualization gives us that ability to use custom security policy deployment and gets away from saying, hey, we've got to chuck a firewall in here or a firewall there, which of course doesn't translate to cloud. And indeed, a conversation I had with one of the security managers at one of the big cloud providers said basically, yeah, if you're thinking in terms of that kind of network-based infrastructure model, if you're trying to translate that to cloud, you really got the wrong paradigm. So again, microsegmentation helps us move. And we're going to see how that works. And as you say, we can protect every instance with policy-driven application security controls. So let's take a look and see how that works, especially in the cloud. So as I said, it gives us this additional granularity when we're adopting cloud service and we're trying to port things to the cloud, but even when we're doing new deployments as well. And of course, new deployments means we start thinking about new technologies. We see a lot of containers. We see a lot of Kubernetes, still some Docker, but it's starting to move away from that as well. But then, of course, there are the serverless models, Lambda computing as well. And again, we can align with those new deployment options. As I said, we can get rid of the traditional perimeter-based thinking. So we don't necessarily need to be thinking about, well, what are we doing to protect endpoints in terms of anti-malware? We don't need to be thinking about, again, firewalls per se. And of course, the other point is that this allows us to, in fact, actively allows us to create and manage infrastructure visualization, which is incredibly useful for us as humans when we're trying to manage these complex, intricate technology stacks. As I said, we've got controls. We've got a number of levers we can pull. So we can pull our levers depending on the environment type, on the regulatory scope, on what the application is doing and its behavior, or indeed on what we perceive as the infrastructure supporting our cloud environment. And the fundamental benefit to us as security managers is the true realization of least privilege in the cloud. We can make sure that data moves where we want it to move and only where we want it to move as a result of policy, which is actually quite important, especially when you're thinking about combating data exfiltration. Because in actual fact, the traditional perimeter model doesn't work, which is why we see so many leaky cloud buckets. It gives us as well this consistency across cloud providers. And as I say, when we're then thinking about mergers and acquisitions in the future, we're also then not limited by how we manage different, if you like, network or infrastructure-based policies, because, of course, each application that's going through the M&A has its own micro-segmentation policy. So I want to do the analyst thing and talk a little bit about what we see in the markets. So microsegmentation as a sector, it's showing some fairly healthy growth. Right now, I'd say we'd see it heading towards 3.6 billion, which we estimate it will achieve in 2026. We're seeing just over 20.04% CAGR, and that momentum is accelerating as more organizations are adopting this technology. We would expect that the 27.2% year-over-year growth rate, which we saw in 22, will continue and indeed will accelerate. As I say, the market size, I can go on to that later on the presentation, and indeed most of the growth, as we would expect, is being led by organizations based in the USA. And again, no surprise, I think, is that the market is fragmented with several players occupying the market. And this, of course, is why you see the growth of professional services firms helping and assisting in this area. So what are the key market drivers? Well, clearly, we are all painfully aware of the rising number of attacks in connected devices or systems. We're very aware that cyber criminals carry out cyber attacks on network-connected devices or systems, and their purposes is to destroy, alter, or steal data for a monetary gain. DDoS attacks, again, are used to obviously prevent access to key systems. So if I am a video content provider and nobody can get access to the subscription service I provide, I'm going to see a sharp drop in customer satisfaction and indeed a drop in possibly in subscription numbers as well. That can be, again, that can be quite deadly in today's fast-moving world. Malware attacks. Again, we can talk about the different numbers of malware attacks, but clearly a number of these attacks are now semi or indeed wholly automated, and indeed are using malware to, if you like, scan, find vulnerable points, and then insert. And of course, the bugbear that we've all seen for many, many years inside our enterprises of people using weak passwords or people using the same password for their enterprise accounts as they do for, I don't know, iTunes or whatever, is writ large when we come to the cloud. And unless we get very clever with, again, trying to make geographic or indeed network-based access controls, which are difficult in today's we work, we are going to see that password attacks are still going to be a favored choice for the attacker. But malware attacks are one of the leading threats that everybody is concerned about right now. Ransomware, spyware, rootkit, riskware, Trojans, verms, and viruses can cause huge losses to businesses. And indeed, when we see, an interruption, even over the Christmas holiday break, I saw one major newspaper that looked like it got hit by a piece of malware, but managed to recover. And certainly, one of the things we're expecting in dark reading is that we're going to see this rising number of cyber attacks will have an influence, a positive influence on the growth of global markets during this forecast period. What does that mean in English? Attackers can keep doing bad things, and security leaders are going to be trying to find ways to fix it. Microsegmentation is looking increasingly attractive as a solution, which of course brings us on to market trends. The regulatory environment in which we operate is only becoming more stringent. Privacy regulations are expanding, obviously, from Europe, California. We're seeing other states now bringing on equivalent or similar privacy regulations. And again, that obviously impacts this industry positively. But again, obviously, microsegmentation is a good way of drawing a line around your sensitive data and the applications that use it. And since we are seeing that, and since we are seeing governments, of course, enforcing these regulatory frameworks, then again, that drives the market. As I said, microsegmentation will protect sensitive data within the rapidly changing cloud, and by dividing a network or piece of infrastructure or cloud fabric, however you want to consider it, by dividing into workloads and then providing security capabilities around those workloads, allows us to obviously then decide on the capability and importance of each workload. And of course, we're seeing vendors, hardware vendors, but also the cloud vendors as well, are bringing microsegmentation into their fabric, into their solutions. And our expectation is that all of this will have, again, a positive influence. This is why we will see that CAGR continue to accelerate. So on the negative side, what about the challenges? Well, microsegmentation, as I said, there are a number of different vendors, and it's true to say that many of these solutions are not wholly interoperable. And the interoperability is one of the things that can indeed create challenges until the market stabilizes, until it finds its own level, and until vendors figure out how and where it is beneficial for them to interoperate and play together. One of the important roles, of course, that any professional services firm can provide is to facilitate that interoperability. And by doing so, making sure that integrating of physical networks and security devices actually enhances the security of the network, because you're thinking of the physical network, whether it be legacy or new, and the cloud, all working as one holistic environment. When I think about interoperability, well, without it, and the phrase I've always used is that we are giving openings, we're giving opportunities to an attacker, if you like, to insert a chisel into our security framework and crack it open. And as I say, the polite way of saying that is that increases the vulnerability of the system, which leads to security breaches in an organization. Clearly, microsegmentation is a reasonably complex and new technology. And of course, we're looking to vendors to provide regular updates in the form of patches, which again becomes important to stay compliant with the regulations, which pretty much now all include a vulnerability management section. So what could limit this? As I say, the key challenge I see to this market growing as we'd expect is the interoperability, and people saying, well, actually, these things don't work together. I need to find another solution that does. But let's look at the benefits to us as security managers, as architects, as engineers. What do we get out of this? Well, we talk a lot about attack surface management in the webinars from Dark Reading, and certainly this helps reduce that attack surface. When we did our fast moves from the traditional data center to the cloud, we opened up the attack surface. And I mentioned in passing earlier in this webinar how easy it was for, and still is, for people to scan for vulnerable data buckets and just siphon off data. Fast-moving application deployment models that our DevOps teams are using are outstripping our traditional change processes baked into traditional security architectures like, for example, SABSA and so on. And so we need to find something that is more flexible, more agile, and indeed more, if you like, cloud-centric. Our traditional techniques, however, that we developed, such as system hardening, vulnerability management, access controls, and network segmentation remain best practices. And personally, I was doing this 30 years ago when I was building firewall complexes in my employer at the time, Sun Microsystems. And so, we're still seeing these techniques are valuable, but of course they are enhanced by microsegmentation. It gives us additional observability and allows us to visualize the attack surface. And as humans, that visualization component is tremendously important. It allows us to think coherently about it. Lateral movement security. And I talk to a lot of security engineers and they say, oh, lateral security movement, that's bad. Well, it is bad in a way because certainly an attacker will try and laterally move in order to find a way through a layered firewall network to get a juicy asset like a data server, whatever it may be. We can stop focusing on the perimeter. And as I said, we should stop focusing on the perimeter in the cloud. The traditional idea of a network perimeter is long gone. The other thing, of course, that is true is when we think about cloud architectures and we need to rapidly scale, we need to be able to move data around and workloads around between horizontal components, then actually east-west traffic is quite significant and increasing in volume, which means that we need to allow east-west traffic. And also, because of the volume, it's quite easy for an attacker to hide. So we need to be able to discern what's hostile lateral traffic and what's just the normal now heavy volume of east-west traffic. The third benefit I see is, again, critical applications. And we can say, well, actually, pretty much every application has importance about it. Pretty much every application has some criticality in the process it's supporting. Well, wouldn't it be great? And we can provide consistent security across different platforms, which means if we're moving to a different cloud platform, if we are, forced to move by some continuity issue or other, whatever it may be, we can keep our consistent security policy implemented and realized in a microsegmentation approach across different platforms. We can deliver process-level granularity that helps align security policies with application logic and enables, as I said, whether we're in our legacy data center, whether we're in the cloud, whether in some halfway house like the V boxes, we can still use a consistent security policy. We have high value targets, certainly to an attacker. Domain controllers. Again, controlling those gives an attacker significant power in our network. Privileged access management systems. Again, obviously, if an attacker can overtake those, and they have, literally the keys to the kingdom, they can do all sorts of things, up to and including. And I've seen this injecting, transactions to be signed by a secure signing architecture, and then going out into cross-banking networks. And, of course, jump servers that act as those bastions between our different security zones, allow remote engineers to come in. Again, a very high-value target to an attacker. Microsegmentation, of course, means we can pack up our security policy along with our application, which means if we are looking to move to containers, and many organizations are, our microsegmentation policy can go along in that container as well. And of course, there are specific industry regulations. Healthcare, and we all, I'm sure, have heard of HIPAA, and many of us on this webinar are probably dealing with it right now. Financial services, and I've mentioned PCI DSS, but for those of you in big banking, of course, there's the various SOC 2 regulations to think about as well. And of course, other privacy regulations. I've mentioned CCPA, I've mentioned GDPR in passing, but the number of security regulations and privacy regulations is only increasing. So our fourth benefit, improved regulatory compliance. Where we have infrastructure containing regulated data. And I talked about payment card data, but again, healthcare data, anything that we consider, and for that matter, pharmacy research figures, retail figures are considered highly sensitive as well, although not necessarily so directly regulated, but we can isolate those in their own microsegments, and thus compliant usage can be better enforced. And as I say, I'm going to give you the chance to groan again about PCI DSS. It proving that systems where you say, hey, this is out of scope, are they really separate from cardholder data? In my inglorious past as a PCI DSS auditor, I think the number one argument I used to have with clients where they say, well, this system's out of scope. And I said, it really isn't. It's on the same network as your systems that are processing card payments. And again, that becomes challenging. Microsegmentation obviously avoids that because we can use advanced labeling, allowing us to examine the cardholder data environment and keep separate the flow of data in the cardholder data environment, and their communication flows in more granular detail. So I'd like to wind up this with some suggested first steps. Unlike any IT transformation, we start slow. We take baby steps, we crawl, then we walk, then we run. So the first thing is to start with a phased approach. This is not all or nothing. It's not make or break. So we can relax a bit. We can pick the applications, the data, the processes that we want to apply microsegmentation. We can start on projects that are manageable, easy to complete, and that we can demonstrate tangible results to. We can prioritize systems, as I said, that holds data we consider sensitive. PII, personally identifying information, other critical data, depending on your business. And we can start with those. Or for that matter, you can say, well, actually, let's do the low-risk approach. Let's start with data where it doesn't really matter because we really want to explore this technology and find out what we can and can't do with it. Either way, this gives the route to zero trust. And by the way, for those of you who read my dark reading articles on zero trust, I'm awfully pleased that it aroused so much sentiment, both positive and negative. Thank you for your reading. But essentially, zero trust is something that does make sense to all of us as security practitioners. Always verify. Don't rely on implicit trust assertions is a foundational principle. There is no default trust for any entity, no matter what your source IP address is. And remember, you shouldn't trust IP addresses. No matter what your machine type is, no matter what your account name is, there is no default trust. And what we're seeing is that many vendors are building in this zero trust capability into hardware and software. So again, zero trust aligns well with, and indeed can be delivered by, a microsegmentation approach. Create a map to establish barriers and monitor. And again, I emphasize this in everything I talk about, is that we must build, but we must also monitor what we've built. We must understand data flows, servers, and security devices so that we can put security filters and virtual firewalls, other controls in the right places and create those secure borders between segments. And then once we've done that, we must monitor. We must look for data that suddenly isn't flowing the way we thought it was going to do. We must look for servers that are doing unusual things. Why has that server suddenly started being a DNS server? Why has that server suddenly started emitting email traffic? Why is there a encrypted data connection? Perhaps even something that looks like it's going out to a network like the Tor network. And our security devices not only create the trust zones, the barriers between the different areas, but they also monitor when things are going out. Because what's that saying? An attacker has overcome our controls and is then we then need to swing into place our practiced, rehearsed incident response plan. So at this point, I would like to hand over to my colleagues. I have Dennis Payton and Doug Schiel. I'd like to hand over to them and let them talk about how they help us implement this.
Thank you, Jonathan. This is Doug Schiel. I'm a practice manager at Optiv. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how we help our customers solve their zero trust challenges and how they complete their zero trust journey. But in order to complete that journey, the first thing you have to do is map it out, right? And so that's where the fundamentals come in. A zero trust journey starts with the fundamentals. It must be fundamental to how you're designing a system, how you're designing the overall program. That means you're going to have to assess where you are at and determine where you want to go. That could be looking at your data and your data classification, looking at your enterprise business workflows, your compliance landscape, and your risk program, as well as the actual tools that you have in place today and the operational capabilities that you have in place today. From that, you're going to build a map to get you to the integrated state. That integrated state is where you have the tool, you're bringing the tools, the people, and the process together to ensure that this solution can protect the segments that you need to protect and provide that zero trust experience, right? And then the final part of that is to make it adaptive. And that's where you're evolving the solution over time. You're continually monitoring, you're improving its proactive capability, not just the reactive capability. And we'll get into that in a little detail later here. Now, Optiv has identified 4 principles of zero trust. And those are mapped to the NIST 800-207 publication on zero trust architecture. The first one is to establish a micro perimeter, right? And that's where network segmentation can come in, and segmentation in general. When we do that, we're trying to actually isolate not just hosts and networks and subnets the way we traditionally think about them, but we're actually identifying data sets and workflows and really getting down to that particular workload or data context and isolating and protecting it, right? So now that we have all of those, let's assume we have all of those little pieces, all those little buckets or containers, right? Now, how do we get into them? How do we decide who gets in, who gets out, or under what circumstances? In order to do that, we're going to establish a contextual identity for the use of that data, the use of that resource. It's not just, an IP address or a username or something like that, but actually establishing a contextual identity with multiple pieces of context as defined in a couple of different frameworks, right? After that has all been worked out, we're going to look at applying a set of robust security controls kind of in that integrated state here, right? And that's where your microsegmentation, as well as your privileged access management, access control, those tools, those technology pieces come into play. And then we're going to be continuously reviewing and make sure that this thing is adaptive, to changing contexts, evolving threats, and your progressing compliance landscape, right? So I like to look at this from a standpoint of what some of my customer challenges are and how we're helping our customers address some of the different things that they're seeing in their environment as it relates to zero trust. And the reason we look at it this way is nobody's really coming in and building their network from scratch with a zero trust roadmap, right? Like that's the ideal state. But realistically, most of my customers already have functioning environments of some sort, right? And they need to figure out how to prioritize which workloads to protect, or how to prioritize what it is that they're going to sort of kick the tires on when it comes to this type of shift, right? So we talk about that in terms of how customers are handling the shift today. And that's really one of the major impetuses for readdressing your network architecture and your network security and your overall security program today is over the last few years, there have been a number of shifts that we can talk about, right? We have the shift to the cloud, where we have a lot of workloads that have been shifted to the cloud. We're shipping compute and storage into the cloud, as well as moving to SaaS applications and SaaS services. But when we're shifting to the cloud, we're following best practice reference architectures provided by the cloud providers, which often aren't very well informed about how to do microsegmentation or how to isolate those hosts. And in fact, traditional networking in some ways kind of breaks down when you get into those cloud provider environments because of the way that they are designed in terms of providing the 5 nines of reliability to the rest of the customers in their environment. If you want to eat up a bunch of cycles down home in your data center, no big deal. That's your problem. But up in the cloud, we kind of have to do some things to protect that resource, preserve that resource for the rest of the users of that cloud platform, right? So those reference architectures are good enough, provided the baddies aren't already in there, right? But what do you do if the baddies are in there or they're trying to get in there? And that's where having a more sophisticated approach where you're identifying workloads and contexts under which things should be accessed, and then building robust controls in at that level is going to get you some mileage. So customers that have made that shift, but they really don't have a lot of security in place at that level, we're seeing a lot of traction there, right? And that helps them to get to tell the story to boards and tell the story to their teams to make the investments to make this work, right? The shift left is another major shift. And that one is actually more of a fight than a shift in some cases, right? But maturing your DevSecOps, adopting network security in your cloud delivered applications, and also moving some security processing into your DevSecOps and the secure automation of deploying new workloads, including firewall as code and container series firewalling, right? We also have the shift to distributed work or distributed and remote work, right? So really the premises alone is an insufficient boundary. Many of us don't badge into an office every day. If you do, God bless you. But for those that are just working from anywhere, right? The device and username alone aren't really accurate stores of your identity because that laptop could have been picked up while you were on the bus, right? So having other aspects of identity identified are important, and using those as gateways to your resources important, and a lot of customers are struggling with exactly what to do there. Two-factor is certainly a big one. Many folks have adapted two-factor authentication at this point, right? But now we should really be leveraging some of the groundbreaking work in AI and in user behavior analytics to understand under what conditions certain resources are accessed, in what volume and in what context, right? And really ensuring that users that are working remotely and working from these different locations are able to access just what they need and not one bit more, right? Until there's a legitimate business need, and determining when that business need occurs. Another shift we're dealing with is the shifting perimeter, or the fact that perimeters don't really traditionally exist anymore in the way that we think about them, right? Enforcement points at the firewall in your data center, or just the cloud provider perimeter, is insufficient. And that's particularly true now because we see it very commonly, threat actors doing land and expand type exercises. That's really how you get C2. Even if you can't get, if you can't achieve C2 from where you're sitting, if you can reach out to another host and just keep finding other hosts, that's how most of your bigger breaches are happening these days. Is those workloads, those threat loads get into the environment, they move laterally, they eventually slowly over days, weeks, months find a host that they can exploit, and then start finding credentials they can exploit, or unsecured storage containers, things of that nature. So there really is no good way to look at just here's everything that's on the trust side of the house, here's everything that's on the untrust side of the house, and calling it good. Within the trust side of the house, you actually do need to micro-categorize, if you will, what trusted looks like. And it's not just in terms of physical data, but how that data is accessed and used, how those resources are accessed and used. And then, of course, shifting responsibilities, right? The shared responsibility model introduces a lot of confusion for folks these days in the sense of what portions am I responsible for? This kind of goes back to the earlier conversation about preserving, say, your cloud infrastructure. And I think a lot of folks would like to believe that there's a lot of magic going on in the cloud, right? And we know that Microsoft has some interesting capabilities, and some of the other cloud providers do have some interesting capabilities from where they sit in the world and in the landscape today, right? But at the end of the day, they're not going to protect your data inside your specific cloud workload, in your cloud environment, right? You're responsible for protecting that data and classifying it and deciding, what can be stored where and under what conditions can it be accessed or transported, right? And then also we have evolving compliance and cyber insurance requirements. Cyber insurance wasn't even a thing until relatively recently, right? So folks are having to deal with, those evolving needs from those aspects of their business, and we're here to help them make those, sort of plan out and make those migrations. But compliance and cyber insurance in particular are one of those things that are really causing boards and technicians to come together and pick up the ball on segmentation and microsegmentation, and on the zero trust journey as a whole. So let's say you haven't shifted to the cloud, right? You haven't done a lot of those shifts. If you're a manufacturer, you're in healthcare, things like that, businesses like that, you still have a huge on-prem presence. The same thing with, universities and K through 12 for that matter. You still have people coming in every day, and you have assets coming in every day. How are you dealing with this evolving threat landscape? And it's not to just look at it in the traditional networking sense, right? But unfortunately, that's where a lot of folks still are. We have folks that have incomplete or unstructured premises network segmentation, or weak network access control systems. It's like, all right, it's a company-owned machine, we're good, and let it do everything it wants to, right? That really doesn't cut the mustard anymore these days. It's important to ensure that you have a live user there, there's an active business need, the machine is compliant, it's executing your security controls, and they have a business need to be accessing that particular data source, right? We also have in manufacturing and utilities, retail, healthcare, a ton of IoT, the Internet of Things and Internet of Forgotten Things. Just piles of these devices that are just out there. They're thrown on a VLAN somewhere, just doing what they do. And nobody's really doing, or I should say that a lot of folks are struggling with doing meaningful analysis on what exactly that device needs to be doing at any given time, what constitutes good behavior and bad behavior for a device, for a headless device, as it were, right? And that's something that we're helping folks with, is classifying those particular use cases, those devices, those device behaviors, and ensuring that good devices continue to have the access. They can talk back to the to the PLCs and to the automation controllers and things like that, but something that shouldn't talk to it, taking a proactive step to isolate it, right? On-prem folks are still dealing with those sophisticated nation state and organized threat actors that are looking for, PLCs and automation controllers to try to get in and disrupt power grids, shut down manufacturing, things like that, and hold your entire operation, if you will, your physical operations hostage, right? So again, some of these technologies that may be in place may be a little bit older, right? But they're, and so following manufacturer recommendations around just creating some some broad networks and then just having whoever plug in and manage those isn't really sufficient. I think there is still absolutely space to meet those manufacturer requirements for automation controls and manufacturing, but then also apply these new some of these new segmentation and microsegmentation components to your infrastructure to better protect some of those legacy infrastructures that are really feeding your line of business, right? We talked about cyber insurance and compliance, GRC, but M&A, and then those prior concepts, cyber insurance, compliance, and GRC, right? So let's say I make a new acquisition, and now all of a sudden that acquisition changes the very nature of my business and changes what I am required to do as a company. Now I've purchased, maybe I become a data controller instead of a data processor, or vice versa, right? And so we're helping customers understand how that impacts what they do with their networks and how to start to separate those networks out. So integrating businesses in an M&A sense, but then also compartmentalizing. That's a great opportunity to start splitting things apart, figuring out where things need to live from a device, network, identity, context standpoint, and really do that discovery. You're in there doing the discovery anyway as part of the merger and acquisition. Now's a great time to go in and actually do that discovery through a zero trust and a microsegmentation lens, right? And then we're also bridging security between the premises and the cloud, the hybrid cloud, and use of SaaS applications for our customers that are still mainly on-prem. If you're in healthcare and manufacturing, yes, you still have a big data center presence, and you still have lots of devices out there that are actually driving your line of business. However, you're also adopting a lot of the security as a service solutions, and you're adopting cloud for some of your workflows, or some of your vendors are providing cloud delivered, patient care solutions and things like that. How do we manage access to those things and ensure that we're meeting your compliance requirements, as well as enabling the business to succeed, right? So that's another area that we'd like to help our customers out with. And so when I talk about how we do that, we really do, Optiv does that as an advise, deploy, and optimize type approach. Optimize, or in some cases actually operate, right? So on the advise stage, that's where we're doing our assessments. We're doing some workshops. We're really doing some discovery on your environment for you. Now, a great place to start would be a zero trust readiness assessment, to look at the existing tools, the existing shape of your business, as it were, and come up with some recommendations, right? But depending on where you are in your zero trust journey, there are a number of other more focused assessments that we can do that would give us more information about meaningful areas of your business that you might have blind spots or some questions about, right? Network security architecture reviews, IoT, identity, data governance, and data classification. Data classification is probably one of the more important ones that a lot of folks are still struggling with. Your enterprise risk program, and then also looking at your cloud and applications and your DevSec life cycles. There's a number of targeted assessments as well as high-level business assessments that we can do, right? Also in that advise phase, we'll be picking out some of the technology potentially, right? We might be picking some of the technology solutions or helping you to choose the technology solutions or get the most out of the technology solutions that you're invested in today. In order to do that, we might be doing something along the lines of an objective tools analysis and rationalization, where we're going to scorecard the tools you have in your environment and help to rationalize what it is that you have in your environment. I think the statistic is 73 tools is what the average enterprise has in their environment, security tools, and that's a significant number. In that 73 tools, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of gaps, a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of things aren't working or interoperating very well together. Or you're just not realizing the value of what you're paying for, frankly. A tools analysis is a way for us to really unlock the value that you might already be invested in and not using appropriately, right? So now when we get to the actual network segmentation piece of it, we're going to have to apply that to your environment, right? We're installing technology, right? We're installing security tools. And these tools must be robust, they must be integrated, and they must be adaptive, as we talked about earlier, right? They must be able to adapt to changing contexts, to changes that are needed to handle an M&A opportunity or to handle new applications. And they must be able to automate as well. And so in our optimization phase, we're going to ensure that you're getting the efficacy out of that zero trust framework, that zero trust journey, and that set of tools, right? We're going to be improving end user experiences, and we're going to be looking to improve security outcomes by actually providing actionable alerts, leveraging AI to distill out some of the noise and have the analysts doing actual analyst work, not just picking through huge queues of unmanageable information, right? And where possible, also automating the response to particular threats or containment and breach scenarios, right? And then, of course, if customers are interested and willing, we also provide managed services and white glove solutions that can give you greater levels of control or hand over some of that control to our teams to give you sort of managed solutions, if you will, around the technologies and the security program itself, right? So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis. But before I do, I wanted to invite you to visit optiv.com/zero-trust. Take a look in there for more information about how we address zero trust and to hear from some of our experts and technical fellows. Also take the opportunity to pick up one of our digital or in-print field guides. We have one here for zero trust, for example, but there's one for SASE. There's 8 other cybersecurity field guides that we'd be more than happy to share with you. So thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Great, thank you, Doug. So hello and good morning, or good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're at. My name is Dennis Payton. I'm with Palo Alto Networks. I am the product marketing for our software firewalls. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit is 2 things. One is, Jonathan talked about zero trust. Doug talked a little bit about zero trust. There's a lot of confusion around what zero trust is. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And then in the context of segmentation and microsegmentation, how do you get those enforcement points and those security enforcement points? So those are the 2 things I want to talk about. So when I joined Palo Alto Networks, I was looking at this zero trust thing and going, what is this? And there's a lot of confusion in the market space for it. And I was confused about it. And I come from the application side of the world. and I've come into the security with Palo Alto Networks. And before that, I was trying to figure out, what is this zero trust thing? A lot of vendors are just slapping zero trust onto their product name and saying, hey, we're zero trust, trying to get on that wave and ride it, but they really truly aren't zero trust. So let's throw the products aside for a minute and the vendors aside for a minute and talk about zero trust. This is the best framework I've seen so far, is what are you protecting in the zero trust environment? There's users, there's applications, there's infrastructure. When we're talking about microsegmentation in the cloud and multi-cloud and hybrid clouds and how do you protect those applications, it's mainly that application side of things. On the user side of things, access into the cloud, into and out of the cloud, you can have CASB, you can have SASE, those types of protection elements. On the infrastructure side, you're looking to protect, IoT devices and your supply chain, those sorts of things. But on the application side is once you get into the cloud, you want to make sure you have a layered approach to that. And so that's where microsegmentation and segmentation come into play, is protecting those applications wherever they may reside in the cloud, whatever format they are in, if they're modern designed applications or traditional applications. The second piece of this is, how do you go about enforcing that? So you got the microsegmentation, segmentation that defines your protection surface, but in and out of that, you need that protection and that enforcement point. So there's three main areas that you want to focus on. One is identity. Doug touched on the identity piece of that a little bit, and the devices. So you really want to have a platform approach that really identifies where that traffic's coming from, which user it's coming from. Is it coming from developers? Is it coming from the user access? What workloads? Many applications are talking to applications, so workload to workload through APIs, which devices that they're coming for. And then you make that decision on the access side of things. Hey, am I going to allow this to happen? I've got traffic coming from this source to this destination. Is that allowed? Again, we want to focus on, I think both Doug and Jonathan talked about, is that least privileged access. But you really got to find out what that privilege is, by that identity, and really identifying that. So now you've got the identity, and you say, yeah, I'm going to allow that access. Jonathan was talking about that continuous security, right? You've got to have it continually checking for that malicious activity. And so that's what happens in the transaction, from the source to the destination. That transaction continues on, the traffic continues on, so you want to continuously check that transaction that's going on in that, while that traffic is up all live. And so this is just the applications I'm focused on. You can talk about the users and the other side, but this is a great framework to think about zero trust as you get to that journey that Doug talked about, as you're taking, from traditional networking all the way up through your cloud, and you're making that journey to shift left, shift to the cloud, et cetera, that Doug talked about. So that is just a quick primer on zero trust and how I think it's a great framework. I can give you some more assets on this later on that you can kind of break it down a little bit more. But what I want to do is shift over a little bit and talk about, so interoperability was brought up, and how does that interoperability work? What's happening more and more is customers and the market is taking a shift to platforms. I relate this back to the ERP world, where there used to be all these different pieces of software to do shipping and receiving, another one to do order taking, another one to do billing. They're all separate things, and they all kept collapsed and came into a platform, like an ERP platform or a CRM platform, actually application. Security is doing that as well. They're collapsing everything. We're removing all the point products, which create those security gaps, and they're collapsing down into platforms. So the approach is to take that platform approach. So your platform needs to do a few things. In the microsegmentation segmentation world, we defined that protect surface. The attack surface is huge, right? When you go into the cloud, it's just huge. Now you need to bring it down and define what protect surfaces I want to do through segmentation, and microsegmentation. And then once you define that surface, it's what's coming into and out of that surface and internal to that surface, right? So that's your inbound, your outbound, and your lateral movement within that surface. And again, the platform needs to support all this segmentation and whatnot. So what I'm showing here is these three bubbles. That shows your inbound, outbound, and lateral, and then also that segmentation piece. What I've got there tagged in yellow is the actual security elements that are integrated into the platform for threat protection, for your sandboxing for unknowns. You send stuff up to a sandbox and explode it up there. If it explodes on you, you block it. If it doesn't explode, you may allow it. URL filtering, DNS security, etc. In the microsegmentation world, and I'll talk about this here in a minute, is you also may want to provide some data loss protection in there as well. But fundamentally, if you look at that bottom line there, I talked about that identity, and Doug talked about that, Denny. These platforms also need to look at your applications, identify them by ID, and ID your users, and ID your devices, and ID your content. In addition, most of that traffic is what? It's going to be encrypted. 90% of that is encrypted. So you need to look at that transaction, but you need to decrypt it and then analyze it, make sure there's no malware in it, and then recrypt it and send it on. So that platform should do all those things, prevent those known and unknown threats, and make sure you're enforcing that least privileged access and that continuous trust verification that goes on. Ideally, this is all ML powered. A lot of stuff is getting ML powered and AI enabled so that you reduce the human error aspect of it. And so that's what you're looking for in a platform when you're looking at microsegmentation and enforcement. So very quickly here, I pushed the wrong button because I'm in a different platform. This is a busy slide, maybe not so busy for you practitioner folks, but this is kind of an old-fashioned three-tier application. And it's, it may be in a public cloud, it may be in a zone, you may subnet some things off, you may have the application tiers, you may actually look at breaking that down. But if I put all that in the background, it's basically a three-tier application. First, you want to protect that access to your web tier. You may be doing that with a CASB or a SASE type of interface. And then the application itself. Remember, the applications are talking to applications, and you may have some lateral movement between applications calling other applications APIs. You want to make sure you secure that so that's not getting spoofed. Doug talked a little bit about, and John talked about PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance and all those sorts of things. You may actually microsegment off your databases to really protect all that critical data, right? So those are the three areas that you can kind of segment those off, but the important piece is the enforcement of that. So you imagine replicating this over multiple clouds. You may have Google Cloud Platform, you may have a Microsoft Azure platform, an AWS platform, and you have many of our customers have a multi-cloud approach. 90% of customers are going that way. You need to have that consistent platform across all those clouds so you don't have different disparate security. So that's kind of where I wanted to talk about the importance of not only a platform, but a platform that works across multiple clouds and hybrid clouds environments, and you can get that consistent security to take that trip, that journey through your zero trust. So I'll leave it at that. With that notion. If you want some more information, there's some great assets here on zero trust from here at Palo Alto Networks. And as Doug mentioned, there's a nice cybersecurity field guide on zero trust that can guide you through that. So these are some great assets for you guys to take a look at. So with that, I'll pass it over to Becky to wrap us up. Thank you for joining us.
I want to thank you all. That was a masterclass in zero trust and microsegmentation. I think our audience definitely got their time's worth today. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time for Q&A, but I did want to just get to a couple of quick, if everybody's okay, just going a minute or two over. I wanted to, again, Matt Johnson asked the website again, that will be shared with you, not to worry. And I also wanted to get to, excuse me, Edward's question, because he had a really good real world question that I'm hoping you guys can address. Manufacturing sites, he writes, require an engineering maintenance laptop that is used to connect devices in an OT environment directly via USB, serial, or Ethernet connections. What would be the best way to secure this laptop in that environment? This just seems like a really real world issue where you talk about the physical and the cyber sort of hybrid conundrum. Maybe each of you could give your thoughts on that.
Cortex XDR. No, I think at XDR, an integrated sort of endpoint and behavior analytics and data recording solution is going to be a huge part of that. I know that's another agent on a machine, but I think that's one of the better choices out there that one could make. Dennis, I don't know if you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, so from an OT perspective, right, a lot of OT, if you're talking about some critical infrastructure type OT, is actually air gapped out. And so our network security platform actually supports OT, IoT security, and in those air gapped environments as well. Again, you're talking about an engineering laptop coming in and connecting up to an OT device. The key thing is that platform, that security, again, identifies that device, identifies the user, all the things that I just talked about. It's in the platform to get that zero trust identity, and then applies the security to that. And again, a good platform like the Palo Alto Networks security platform will do that for you.
Yeah, a good IoT platform is that's a whole nother webinar, right? But a good IoT platform is going to know what the device is. It's also going to know what normal traffic looks like for that device based on machine learning and data that it's aggregated from other users or other businesses that have the same device. Anonymous data, but nonetheless data on how that thing should behave, what sites it needs to talk to, what it needs to talk to in the cloud, and on what frequency, all of that fun stuff. But it's going to also baseline how it's being used in your environment. And then when you have deviations from that, you'll be able to take action from a network perspective if you've integrated your other security controls, i.e. your firewall can isolate the host and simultaneously, the actual network infrastructure can isolate it. And that's where things like, a software-defined LAN or the old school network access control can jump in and tell the switch to drop that host on an isolated VLAN, and then send off an alert and an incident to your ServiceNow or your XIM.
One more distinction. Oh, Jonathan, let me just give you this one because I think this one is more right up your alley. Okay. Julio writes, is segmentation the same as creating a subnet within the network? Can you maybe walk him through that?
It's the same. It's the same concept, but when we're thinking about microsegmentation, as opposed to traditional network segmentation, we are creating segments around data flows and application flows, rather than saying there's a chunk of machines that are working, just existing together. So it gives us more control. And the other thing I was going to say about the OT environment, don't forget that in most OT environments, the top priorities are availability and safety. And so again, it's not a simple. It's a very different environment. It's a very and the requirements are very different there. But yeah, that in terms of, I would say, segmentation. Think you can use that as your paradigm, but microsegmentation allows you to basically create a segment around your data flow. And don't forget, you can have several microsegments, if you like, existing in parallel on the same physical segment, which of course is how many cloud infrastructures work.
Right. And if I can add on, it's important to understand that it's not, what you don't want to do is just go and create segments for everything. And we've gone into customer environments where they've created, slash 26 is for everything. And there's really no rhyme or reason. They're just like, well, I don't know let's just isolate that from everything else, put it in another slash whatever, and then create another zone on the firewall and call it good. That's not the way to do this. You actually have to come up with a plan for classifying those workloads or classifying those hosts, those data, those assets. And from a physical network perspective, start grouping things that way, but then also leveraging other controls such as the actual access to that resource in a segmented way, which is a little bit more abstract, but very much more the direction folks are going with it, right?
I am sad to report that we really are up against the clock here. I want to direct our audience to the survey. Please let these gentlemen know how much you appreciate their time and their expertise today. We also want to, besides Jonathan, Doug, and Dennis, Dark Reading appreciates your time and attention. We also want to thank our sponsor, Optiv, as well as everyone in our audience. We appreciate your attention and for all of your good, thoughtful questions. Those will be submitted to our speakers and they will be able to reply to you offline. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to attend the event. This webinar is copyright 2023 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and Optiv, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guest Optiv, I'm Becky Bracken. Thanks so much for your time again, and I hope everybody has a great day.